Hello, today is April 21st, 2020. This is the standard SIG cluster lifecycle call. I will share my screen. Hopefully folks can see my screen. Yes, no? I see a thumbs up from Lumir. All right, so we can just go through the standard group topics. If you have any group topics, please add them and feel free to add them up top and poke me in the meeting and I'll try to get to them if you think of something later on. Lubomir, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, hello. This is just a PSA that, like the meeting from SIG release today, there was a discussion about a certain email that they sent to SIG architecture and other mailing lists about a potential change in the release schedule. I outlined some of the big changes here. First of all, there's not going to be sorry, let me start with the change that is code freeze is now going to lock the release branch. So you have to backport changes uh, once code freeze is up, pretty much. This is the major change. This is only going to affect kubeadm on our side, like, I guess. But still, if you are merging features in core, you have to be aware of this change. I don't think if they agreed on something very important, which is the last point, they wanted to shift the release to the 15th week instead of the 12th. So that's like a delay of 3 weeks. And I think the main reason for that is the COVID situation. I'm not going to argue. But there was a bit of a bike shit about this particular topic because it's disruptive to follow-up releases after that. This is just a PSA. I don't want us to discuss this, but if you have any comments, please go ahead.
I'm not quite following the code freeze bit, just so for my clarification. Are they going to hard branch on code freeze now, and then we need to backport, and then master is unblocked?
Yeah, I think when code freeze lands, they're going to branch. So now you have to backport to 119, cherry picks, pretty much. And
So they're also,
master,
okay.
and at this point, I think development in master is going to continue for the next release. This is my understanding.
Doesn't that seems a little premature given the nature of things? Typically people fix a bunch of stuff, so they're going to have to submit it twice for everything. I don't know. Uh, I think
Yeah,
that's a lot of extra work for them. To be honest, I think they just created more work for themselves. But whatever.
yeah. I think they're fixing the problem with the fast forward because nowadays there has to be this uh, person with credentials that has to perform the fast forwards between uh, master and the release branch.
Yeah, but there's the person who's the cherry pick czar now needs to like be extra vigilant because they're going to get twice the amount of traffic that they normally get.
Yeah, transfers responsibility to the patch managers.
Yeah. So whatever, that's their business. I think that will affect some of us, but not all of us.
Yeah, the last point is a bit problematic. I think that disrupting the cycle because of something is a bad idea because there are a lot of stakeholders to that. I mean, it's fine by 3 days, but by 3 weeks is, in my opinion, disruptive.
I'm not. I mean, I've wanted to have 3 releases a year as a simple way of changing it. Maybe this is a forcing function to have 3 releases a year then, because there's no sense in having quarterly. It was arbitrary choice to begin with, and it's also it sets the time window for expiration for 2 versions to be very tight. At least this pushes this out a little longer.
Yeah, it also feels disruptive to the KEP for quote unquote LTS. But yeah,
Whatever. Are there any other comments? We could bike shed on this for a while if we wanted to, but I don't care enough to make a big deal out of it. Going once, twice, three times. Nothing. All right. Let's go on to sub-project results. If anyone has other topics that they'd like to discuss as a group, feel free to add them. One group topic that I was thinking about, I have no idea what's going to happen with the CFP for KubeCon. I know that it's coming or it's out. I don't recall. But with regards to talks and venue and everything else, one of the things we typically do is coordinate that stuff. But I'm in this weird holding pattern, so I have no idea what conferences are going to look like in the fall/winter timeframe. So next up, so project readouts. Lubomir, you want to go?
yeah, we don't have any major updates. I've been fixing up a pile of small bugs here and there, and also we are working on sending some PRs for fixing the API retries for Kubernetes join, which is a problem that Coaster API discovered. So we're going to try to fix that for 119.
Okay. Any questions for Lubomir? Once, twice, three times. All right. Cops, Justin.
That's good timing. I'm struggling a little bit with Zoom, so I don't know if you can hear me. Or if not, just interrupt me and tell me you can't, and I will try to join on my phone. The thing that is of most cross-project interest, I think, is that there is this, I was going to put in links, but unfortunately GitHub is down as well. I will add links later. There is this not fully diagnosed issue with Flannel and Canal, which uses Flannel, which seems to exhibit primarily on RHEL operating systems or RHEL distros. It appears to be at least two things. There's a checksum offload bug in the kernel and some sort of different sysctl defaults in RHEL. I think what's interesting for this group, though, is this sort of implies we have to or should be testing all the CNIs on all the distros or something. And I have at least started by creating tests for Flannel on all the distros, which is pretty revealing because most of them fail right now, even the ones that CUP supports without Flannel. And that is just using automatic generation of prow jobs. I think we could scale that up to give reasonable coverage. But yeah, that's something I will add links later, but that is something I think of interest in terms of should we, like this SIG's mandate in terms of creating a working set of Kubernetes components.
So I have mixed feelings and thoughts on this because CNI is one of those things where there's like at least a dozen, right? And like I kind of feel like if a vendor puts a CNI out there, they should, like, we can help guide them to test their automation for sure. But the question is, should we resource that as a SIG? I don't know.
It's a great question. I will say that, and this particular bug has caused a lot of issues to be reported against COPS, against Kubernetes, against like KubeADM has a bunch, SIG network has destroyed about it. It does ripple through our ecosystem, so it certainly has a cost to us. And obviously Flannel's more widely used than a new one would be, than my personal one, for example. But
I guess for something like that where it's not, there is no clear maintainer for Flannel, should we start to like have a like right now in the main documentation, we have a list of CNIs, right? Like inside of like the bootstrapping stuff. Should we like, I think one of the things we possibly could do is curate the list of CNIs that we validate or verify against and maybe link out to the other ones. And, given that Flannel is like unmaintained, should we even like be highlighting any of that in our docs?
I confirm that I've seen a lot of Flannel issues, and at this point, I just recommend Calico or WeaveNet instead of Flannel. And I just close tickets all over the place, say Flannel is not really well maintained nowadays. Just try another CNI plugin. This is our perspective as a Kubernetes installer for kubeadm, at least. We just cannot support everything out there. In terms of the docs question, this goes to the discussion that SigDocs opened about third-party content. And they really want to remove most of the CNIs listed on that page. And I think they are still going to allow us to keep our CNIs in the kubeadm guide. That's a separate page where we have a preference for some of our top picks.
Yeah, this is an interesting conversation because I can understand the SigDocs perspective, and I've read that thread before and commented on it. And but it is really difficult as a user who's trying to determine what to pick. Like there are hardly any collections of comparisons or even lists of these things next to each other. There's articles that will compare, maybe 2 or 4 CNI providers, but there's no like CNI hub.
Should we maybe have like as part of our documentation, just have like, somebody has done some verification of these other ones. Everything else, your mileage may vary type of cop out, but try to remove things like Flannel from our docs. Justin, go.
I'm quite tempted to remove Flannel at this point from the kubeadm guide. If you give me this permission, Tim, I'm going to do it right away today, pretty much.
All right, so go ahead.
Okay. In terms of what we test, we can add a sentence for the kubeadm guide that we are explicitly using Calico for testing. It's not really we are using it because this and that. We are using it because it worked for us at that particular time. We are just sticking to it. So we can add a sentence for that and explain it here. Here is our, we have test signal for that, and the rest is untested.
Justin, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's reasonable. I think one of my challenges has always been that we don't have any data. And so like, I figured I could we can start running tests, start getting data. Like, do we actually know that Calico is better, or do we just think it's better? And it used to be that Flannel was better, and now perhaps Calico is better. And like, even if I was pretty shocked at the failure rate of Flannel, to be honest. And I will add Calico as an interesting one. The thing which, even if we don't do the tests ourselves, I think we should create the infrastructure such that like a Flannel or a Calico could come in and like know how to do those cross distro tests in in our test infra project, right? Or it's not our obligation, but I think it's a nice thing to do.
I mean, Justin, how are you going to do the cross distro testing even? How is PRAO allowing you to do that?
So, I mean, COPS creates AMIs on, creates instances on EC2, and we just change the AMI out.
Ah, I see, okay. But for kubeadm, we are just using the kubekins image, which is Ubuntu. So we're kind of bound to a distro for testing.
Yeah, I mean, it might be that Cluster API can do this, and like COPS can do this, and other installers can do this. And I agree, we don't necessarily want to be doing everything. I just thought it was a good cross project like topic to bring up, so that we have like. And I agree with the docs point. Like, if we want to remove Flannel or say like Flannel is deprecated, it would be nice to be able to say like, look at the testing results. Here they are. They're not great, type thing.
Yeah, something that because of the whole CNI picture, something that Kind did, and I like what they did, but it's always a technical complication, is that they implemented their own CNI and they support this CNI. And they say, here is our CNI, it should work for you. If you try something else, it's unsupported for the Kubernetes deployment that Kind is doing. but it's still possible. Yeah.
All right, so I think at this point, the docs update is clear. We can make some call out and we can review as a group. I'm not going to, if somebody wants to help boost the CI signal, that's totally on them, but I see no obligation as a SIG to do that, because that should really be a responsibility of the CNI. We have federated testing, we have all these other capabilities for them to be able to report out. And they've chosen not to do so. I think we can state like this is our default testing CNI, so it's got the most mileage. Other than that, I think that's probably a reasonable call to make. What do other folks think?
+1 from me.
Yeah, that seems fair to me. I think, for historical reasons, COPS has not made a recommendation, so we'll probably like set up reasonable grid testing, but I'm certainly not going to track down. I'm not going to take it as like my obligation to track down and fix every CNI provider out there.
So just as a little bit of historical data, I mean, I'm Brian Borum, I'm lead maintainer on WeaveNet. I was under the impression that WeaveNet is included in some of the Kubernetes end-to-end tests, although I haven't looked in a while. And I don't recall being notified of other mechanisms to join in, although that could be just because I'm forgetful.
It's all test infra, really. It's the nice Byzantine wonderland of test grid and figuring out what signal exists there. We just pick, as a SIG, we typically just pick one to make sure that everything is working. We care more about the componentry of whatever we're testing, particularly in this case. In the previous case would be kubeadm, we get test signal, or COPS would have its own test signal. But we don't particularly care about the CNI itself. It's not a blocking requirement, but you can always add more. If you want to add a test job, go ahead. Basically copy the other test jobs that are there and verify that it's all running.
Yeah, the full story on this, Ben the Elder, Fabricio, and Lubomir know. It's was about April or June last year. We started implementing kind in test infra, and kind with WeaveNet was not bringing up ready clusters. I did ping about this issue with WeaveNet, but we never resolved it. And so I recall Lubomir and Fabricio were debugging on it for a while, couldn't find the problem, and then we just moved the test infra to Calico.
I just checked that in test infra we don't have any jobs, at least I cannot find any, that are using WeaveNet specifically. If you want to add test signal for that, it's kind of difficult with Kinder. We have to patch Kinder to support arbitrary CNIs because it doesn't. Calico is hard-coded. It's doable. We can add test signal for that. And, but please note that if I see the job becoming red for some reason, failing, I have to ping you and we expect a response. That's the only requirement, I guess. Yeah, but that particular problem, Lee, it was something very strange related to kernel modules or something like that. And it was a problem on the VMs that we are getting from GCE and the Docker and Docker scenario, something that I didn't understand.
Yeah, I recall it being very difficult to debug, and that it was host specific. So that's as far as I remember, the state of current understanding and the pre-existing jobs became broken when we continued trying to use WeaveNet, and that was what prompted the move away from it inside of the test infra.
Right.
Yeah, but we still have users outside of the Docker and Docker scenario that are using WeaveNet happily.
Absolutely, yeah.
All right. Let's move on. We can table this and take it offline. If people want to add signal, I'd say go forth. Be wary of what you ask for, because it requires that we will poke you in the eye with an eye poker at a regular interval anytime things turn red. It doesn't look like Daniel's on the call, but he basically gave an update here that he wasn't able to go. They're working on getting binaries ready to go for etcd ADM. Justin and Lee, whoever wants to go on add-ons.
Yeah, Justin, did you have a more recent update on the Google Summer of Code thing than I do? Because I did not work on it in the past week.
As far as I can tell, it's still in this weird limbo state where there's not a lot we can do about it. I am pinging to see if there's any
Okay.
clarity on what we should do.
So the update on this that I'm aware of is that there is, I think, hopefully I'm remembering it correctly, it's April 23rd. We're supposed to have like slot reservations or something. So if anyone knows anything about the number of slots that you're supposed to reserve for the program, that I think determines how many people you're supposed to pick from the pool, and probably like budgetary stuff from Google sides of things. We have no idea what we're doing. But we keep talking about it, so that's good. Things are going great in cluster add-ons. The most recent development that we had was a discussion from last week that went into great depth about the bootstrap needs for very early add-ons such as CNI that need to, potentially if you wanted to write a CNI operator, one of the unique things that you would need to deal with is the API server advertise address because of the absence of a pod or service network. Potentially the absence of kubeproxy. Similar thing for a kubeproxy operator. So yeah, that was cluster add-ons. Does anyone have any comments or anything else to add? Feel free to interject at this moment.
I'd like to maybe set up some time to talk with the add-ons group. I don't know if you saw Michelle Au's, or who, I don't know how to pronounce her last name, email regarding like the notion of a federated API and controllers from the main KK repository. This started with storage, and last SIG architecture meeting, the last thing we discussed was like, let's just make it a full-blown API. Why would we ship something that doesn't have all the componentry required as part of a Kubernetes? But they are asking this question again, and we still don't have an answer for them, because we don't actually fully have support for cluster add-ons all the way through the toolchain. So maybe I can set up some time to discuss this. I've also did an eval and walkthrough of cluster add-ons, and I have a bunch of questions. I don't know if I want to raise them here. I want to distill my thoughts a little bit more. So maybe next time we can have an actual walkthrough and discussion of cluster add-ons and some of the problem space. That's probably more, and I can send out my question list to you, Lee and Justin, to see where we're at.
Yeah, so that sounds like a separate meeting from this general one, right?
Well, I think it'd probably be good because cluster add-ons could be informing for everyone else. Maybe I should just send it to create a doc and send it to the list ahead of time with my questions.
Yeah, I'd look forward to preparing that. So,
Great.
But, yeah, we're making good progress in this group. I think things are starting to form.
For GSOC, you have hours to make a decision on your applicants.
Okay. Well, I guess we better get reading then. Justin, I'll ping you about that right now if you have some time available. So.
I think the deadline is 6 p.m. Pacific time today, but you should check. I'm sure it's today, but you should check the exact time.
Great. Next up,
For
component standard.
Yeah, we had a pretty fruitful series of discussions. Thanks to everyone who attended last week's meeting. We were able to discuss the patterns, the debt and mistakes that we've taken on with things like component config, and we've achieved some consensus on user config and the instance or node or user specific API types. So we want to be prioritizing a proposal to move forward with these separate API types that kind of alienate these fields that seem to be empirically more special. And then we want to also be facilitating the per node UX for things like kubla config inside of kubedam to get away from some of these purely central config patterns and empower users to make their own declarations. Also things like allowing users to provide the config at all opportunities, such as during an upgrade. These are the conclusions that we made. Basically just correcting on some of the previous decisions that didn't work out well. And then we didn't get much into the versioning UX stuff, which is still a maintenance burden and overhead. But kubedam is currently working around those types of issues, as well as tools like Kind. And then there is a very cool and interesting component config proposal and patch for KubeBuilder put up by Chris Hine, who joined last week's call, and we discussed how to simplify and approach the extensibility of this type of API by using shared types and embedding and things like that. So please feel free to read the code and leave your own opinions, and we would appreciate feedback. Thanks.
Any questions for Lee about component config? Once, twice, 3 times. Sharif, Minikube?
Yeah. So yeah, we released the beta. So 110 is being pushed back a week, so we're releasing it next Monday. So we released the beta today, or yesterday, I guess. And it just has like general improvements. I listed some of them in the doc. The big thing is, so a little background, our CI jobs, because we need physical machines, since we test on VMs, they normally sit under somebody's desk at Google. And we've lost SSH access to our Windows machines. So we have no way of turning Windows CI back on. And so the best way I know how to fix that would be to procure an Azure VM, so we can at least test Hyper-V. But I don't know how to go about doing that, so I was wondering if anybody here did. That was it.
Have you tried asking at SIG Windows? I'm sure they have a way to use Boscos to provision Azure machines.
Okay, SIG Windows?
Yeah, the SIG Windows Slack channel, hopefully somebody's going to respond there.
Okay.
Because they use a kube test deployer in test infra that I believe already uses the same mechanic to request Azure VMs, I think.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Any other questions for Minikube? I'll comment out the noticeable outlier. I don't see anyone from Cluster API on the call. I can give a brief update. As you noticed earlier, there was a tweet that went out, so I retweeted with regards to the latest rendition of Cluster API. The main focus for at least the foreseeable future is not necessarily V1 Alpha 4, but to refactor, clean up, address issues with V1 Alpha 3. And that's a long laundry list. If you want to find out more, go to the Cluster API meeting. From a pragmatic perspective, I think V1 Alpha 3 is the the last release and the blog post that went out are probably the last PR that we can do, at least for this cycle. We'll do other asynchronous cowbell to try and denote that this thing is ready now for broader consumption. So I think that if there are other tools that folks are aware of, or maybe even some CI signal that we can potentially change, I think now is the time for us to start to think about refactoring some of our default CI signal. And it's always been my longstanding goal to light /cluster directory on fire. You know, not to say that I hate it, but I hate it with the fire passion of 1,000 suns. So if we can do that in some time in the future, that would be awesome.
I made a fix the other day. I fixed a decoupled kubeadm integration test from the cluster directory because we were using it for some reason. So I did something there. But yeah, hopefully one day end-to-end test signal completely remove this.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of Googleisms inside of the /cluster directory. I don't know if anyone will ever pay down those debt unless it would be community-based, like Google Summer of Code person, maybe, I don't know, that actually reports into Google. But otherwise, I think it's going to be a long tail to eventually turn that trigger over. Or another option would be like, should we set a deprecation time frame? Like set a policy that says cluster, or we don't even know who's maintaining it. Justin, who maintains that anymore? Like you're the single source of that people go to that I understand. I don't know who maintains that.
I don't believe anyone maintains it. I think I'm with you on the we should deprecate it. I think the problem is we need test coverage. Well, we historically the issue has been that we need test coverage. We could argue that we don't need test coverage, but like that has been the big challenge with just like if we just turn it off, for example.
We have CI signal across a bunch of other provisioning tools, though. That's the problem. Is like we have it across COPS, we have it across kubeadm, we have it across Cluster API. There are some features that are being tested that are very Google specific right now, at least as far as the provisioning aspects, that only really get coverage from the main /cluster directory. And they're super Byzantine. Like if you have to like traipse through there to understand what actual test coverage and signal is being percolated out through that. It is not clear to any casual observer.
Yeah, something that's occurred to me is it remains, much to my chagrin, or however you pronounce that word, the path of least resistance when you are adding a feature to add it to the cluster directory. I would much rather it was added to kubeadm or COPS or Cluster API, and that we stopped making the problem worse, as it were. So like, I don't know how we could say that, but right now, like, we continue to add tests of new features to the cluster directory, and that is harmful, in my opinion.
Along with the documentation I want to write, or the questions I have for add-ons, maybe we should craft a statement for next time about policy and deprecation. Because like, if we're not going to support it, it remains like an albatross that we kind of limp along with. I think it's fair for us to say, because we are considered the owners of that, even though most of the people that have quote unquote owned it don't work on the SIG anymore, that we can set a policy or like a sunsetting window for this stuff.
I was thinking about proposing this to this group. How do you feel about potentially transferring ownership and seeing if SIG testing and maybe SIG cloud provider GCP wants the cluster directory, so that we can finally remove our cluster lifecycle label away from it?
I think maybe the policy should be like, we should craft a statement of how we want to do this, which a statement of intent, like we don't own it. Like maybe a long time ago, Robbie and some folks at Google owned it and actually maintained and patched and updated it. Those people have since moved on. So at this point, it is currently headless and is a rolling ball of duct tape owned really by no one. So either we need to find new ownership or we need to deprecate it.
I think everybody agrees that it's deprecated. So, adding the text, the documentation, it's not going to be much of a change if we do that.
Well, I think one of the things that we'll do though is that if we deprecate it, we can talk with testing CI folks. Like no PRs can go into this area, right? Like we can block any PRs and basically say like CI signal comes from cluster API, COPS, and kubeadm.
Yeah, there are multiple problems with that because we first, like my original proposal in there was to start breaking things away from it, from the cluster directory, because currently we have the COS images in there. Also, we have the etcd image, kubeup, obviously. The add-on manager is still being used, to my understanding. So I think we should fragment the cluster directory first before starting to find the owners.
Maybe next group topic. Let's add a group topic for next time, where we actually just kind of enumerate some of this stuff and talk about it in a little more detail. And maybe we can assign some owners, and then we can also craft I can maybe have a crafting of the initial language, because it just limps along forever. It's actually a problem.
I think you're right. I think technically it might actually be deprecated. So I don't know that we can like double deprecate it. I think that's where I think setting this date, as much as I don't like the idea, like threatening a date and telling people like, if this impacts you, let us know, is a good way to discover the uses that we don't even know about, right? Like, I mean, I think sure we should move like the etcd images out. That's important. I don't think that would be too contentious. I think. But yeah, if we say like we will delete the cluster directory on December 31st, like see who screams the loudest and what are they screaming about?
So the README in the cluster directory marks it as being in maintenance mode, accepting no new providers and being maintained only to the current level of support, which is pretty vacuous as a statement. If we are still adding feature flags and things like that to the cluster directory, that seems to be a violation of only supporting what is currently in there.
Oh yeah, like when you put that language a long time ago, I remember when that language was put in, it absolutely has been band-aided to death with feature tests along the way.
Yeah, so in practice, we are supporting it beyond what is already stated in the repository. But yeah, basically it just says we're not going to delete this, but expect nothing to be added here.
Yeah, but the problem here is that if you look at the owner files, there's nobody from this group present in the owner file. It's, I can list you the approvers for /cluster. But the other mic there is Aaron, Krickeberger, Dibs, and Chef Taco. So we don't have any ownership in this directory, but we are still tagged as the owning sig, which I don't think is appropriate at this point.
Yep.
So my first proposal goes back, let's clear the label if people agree, or we should add approvers, which of course creates a complication that we have to have the bandwidth to review the PRs.
Yeah, I mean, it's also labeled as area release engineering, so maybe this is SIG release.
It's really SIG testing, SIG release, and the GCP quad provider.
Would we be happy if we didn't own it, but it continued to exist?
I personally will be happy with that. I know the team is not going to be happy, but as long as we are not the owner, I'm fine. Like let's it exist. We can break stuff out of Kubernetes, and let the owning SIGs deal with that in the future.
I do think that we should, because no one should be using this thing. It seems weird, right? Like as a project, like there's this weird disconnect where we have SIGs who are empowered to do things. We have this thing that exists that is only really used to do releases, and the release management team is not actually testing these feature enablements in the actual tooling that we recommend, right? That's just awkward, right? So it's super awkward. We're release informing for a bunch of other stuff, so they do see it and we do enable it, but we don't broadly enable some of the features that are there. Like we don't do kubeadm for scale testing, right? We should, right? Really. It's the only scale tests are this weird hybridized thing that's inside of the /cluster directory, for example. And I think it does the community a great disservice, in my opinion. Sure, we could let it live on, but I'd rather see it move to something that we maintain. Because I think the community would benefit, right? If the community actually had a bunch of these feature tests going on for, like say, for example, for kubeadm or inside of cluster API, they would be able to know that they could get those artifacts with much more sense of rigor as part of the release process.
Yeah, I completely agree. The problem again is that there are multiple stakeholders at this point. Like we enumerated them earlier, we have SIG release, have artifacts in there, SIG testing have artifacts, API machinery have artifacts in there. There has to be a collective decision by the project. Obviously, everybody wants to remove, but nobody has the time to, to provide the replacement. And we're helping with that, but I think that we shouldn't own the whole effort for replacing cluster.
Yeah, okay. Why don't I take it as an action item to follow up, to come up with a document that outlines the problem statement and the proposed set of things or ideas we can federate out to the larger group and see where we can go. Otherwise,
Yeah, sounds good. But personally, I think we can remove the label and nobody's going to complain about it, the cluster lifecycle label.
Yeah, I think that's legit. I think anybody can do that and should do that now.
Yeah, so do you want me to set the PR for that? I guess it's going to throw some people, but.
Yeah, go ahead, send the PR and then we can start the conversation.
Okay.
Are there any more group topics or things that folks want to discuss? If not, we can get 15 minutes back. Once, twice, 3 times. All right. Take care, everybody.